Hello and welcome to Watch This Space. This is Brian Carney with Rivada Networks, and my guest on this episode is Joe Maguire. Joe has joined the Rivada band as a board member of Rivada Select Services. If I have that right, Joe, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, Brian.
But Joe has a distinguished career in public service and as a Navy SEAL, and he brings a wealth of both experience and knowledge to Rivada and to the project of building the Outernet. And I just want to say thank you very much for joining us on the show, as well as for agreeing to serve on the board of Rivada Select Services.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. It's good to be with you, and it's really a great opportunity to be on the board of Rivada Select Services. I'm really proud to be a member.
So maybe we can just start, if you don't mind, with quickly describing why this board exists and what role therefore you're serving for Rivada. If you could summarize that for our viewers who may not understand why we have this entity and why it needs a separate board and what role it serves for us.
Sure. Well, Rivada Select Services is a wholly owned U.S. subsidiary that's doing business, and we will be having government contracts that will be of a classified nature. And because the parent company is foreign owned, there's a requirement from the United States government and the National Industrial Security Act that there has to be an outer board, at least 3 members who hold top secret clearances. And the purpose is 2 things. One, as board member, we still have to be looking out for the benefit of the corporation and the stockholders. But every bit as important, if not more important, is we have to look out for the security of the United States to make sure that the security laws are adhered to, and that as far as export controls, that we make sure that the export controls are covered.
Okay, so that probably means that there's a bunch of stuff that you can't talk about, but I'm sure that there's plenty that we can.
Sure.
So, one of Rivada's early customers, as I think most of our viewers know, is the U.S. Navy, and we're doing some work for them on how they can use the Outernet to provide secure communication services to, Navy operations, basically. And so that contract is running, as I understand it, through Rivada Select Services, and hopefully, that leads to more and bigger things, right? The first step is to kind of do this work to show them how they can use the Outernet and make sure that we're building something that they can use. We had Commander Goddard, who's now retired, on last year, and we talked with him about this contract and the importance of secure communications to the Navy. If I recall correctly, you retired as an admiral from the Navy, is that right?
Yeah, Vice Admiral, yes.
Vice Admiral. These distinctions are important. I'm not a military man, but I know that, being a vice admiral versus a rear admiral versus, just an admiral, we don't want to inflate or deflate anybody unnecessarily. So,
Thank you.
but thank you for your service. And as a layman, it seems to me very obvious that wireless communications and satellite communications is going to be of particular interest to a service like the Navy, right? You're out at sea, you can't, at the risk of stating the obvious, right? You can't run fiber out to an aircraft carrier or whatever, right? We need wireless communications. In the old days, we had very primitive forms of wireless communications, or even, the flashing lights or whatever. But for decades now, I assume the Navy has relied very heavily on satellite. And, but any communications that is essential to operations is also a vulnerability, right? Because it's a thing that can be targeted, just like a supply line, which is supply lines are obviously still important, but I think in many ways, again, in my layman's mind, communication lines are kind of supply lines of the 21st century in some cases, right? Because we have such a connected warfighting capability that, it's conceivable that, an enemy can at least hamper our ability to fight, or to fight back or defend ourselves or whatever, simply by hampering our ability to communicate with, whether it's ships in the fleet or troops in the field is.
Absolutely. Well, in addition to that, though, Brian, our adversaries are very actively involved in intercepting communications and monitoring. So I think that your view is, and I'm sure you're aware of Salt Typhoon, where
Right.
The Chinese has infiltrated our communication system so much so that in the last campaign, they actually were able to get access to candidate Trump's telephone and the Democratic candidate's phone as well. So
Wow.
the thing that surprises me about that is that we've had the FBI director and United States senator, the vice chairman of the Intelligence Committee, make announcements on that, and I still don't think that has really resonated with the American people as far as the vulnerability of that. And there's also been, just obviously a story in the last month and a half, about members of the cabinet, doing communications on an unsecured phone. And I will tell you this: anything can be countered. And so, what you need to do is just to cut out the middleman or any point of vulnerability that you could possibly have. And with the Outernet, that really minimizes the opportunity for an adversary to intercept the information at any point.
Yeah, we actually talked about Salt Typhoon a little bit on a previous episode. I agree with you. It hasn't gotten nearly the attention it deserves. I'm not sure exactly why that is. Maybe it's because the people implicated, would rather we not talk about it. Maybe it's because sometimes something feels so bad and it's hard to know how to counter it, that you sort of rather not call attention to it. But as you said, one of the ways to deal with this is not to run your communications through third-party networks, right? And we
Yeah.
didn't design the Outernet with Salt Typhoon in mind. Obviously, we were working on this before that news broke, but it just so happens that we designed and are building a system that goes from its point of origin up into space and across our network without crossing third-party things or uncontrolled domains, and back down to its destination. So whether you're transmitting from the Pacific to Europe, or you're, from the Atlantic to Australia, what you can do that without crossing any of these networks that may be compromised. And I think one of the things that's coming out about Salt Typhoon seems like almost all of the legacy networks, if not all of them, are in some way compromised or subject to interception or surveillance. And
Absolutely.
even, we thought a few years back, right, that it was very important that we avoid having, Huawei equipment in certain networks. But it turns out that maybe not that we should be blasé about, Huawei, but even networks that we thought were trusted, probably are not as trustworthy as we hoped.
Certainly. But in addition to communications, our adversaries have infiltrated our power networks, our water supply, and I don't say that as the former acting director of national intelligence. Our former FBI director, Chris Wray, had countless press conferences where he's trying to inform the American people that they have actually infiltrated, our systems. And still, I don't see anybody really realizing just how vulnerability. Now, in the military, as a SEAL, if somebody does something like that, Brian, you would have to say, why? And in the military, we would call that preparation of the battlefield, so that if they become tensions between the United States and China, they are in a position to, not as I've said this figuratively, throw a switch and disrupt the power grid, disrupt the water supply, and disrupt the communications to at least have a delay in the United States' ability to react. And in today's world with information, you have to be able to work and do at the speed of relevance. So anytime they can slow down an adversary, you get the upper hand. And what we used to say years ago in a gunfight, who sees who first wins, So they are actively at it. And no, it's not like we don't have our own offense that the United States plays as well. We are not completely naive. We are not without an offense. But what we need to do, not only militarily, but here's another story that I thought really resonated with me, and I have not seen this play out much. And there's probably a good reason for that for the cryptocurrency community. But on February 21st of this year, the North Koreans were able to intercept a transfer of $1.5 billion of
Wow.
cryptocurrency. Yes. It's the North Korean the group is called the Lazarus Group. So it was transferring from one point to another, and the North Koreans, once again, the land cable, were able to intercept that to the point they were able to steal $1.5 billion in transit along the cable. And the North Koreans are paying for their nuclear program by stealing cryptocurrency.
Stealing crypto. Wow.
So it's not exclusive to the United States military. It pretty much banks. Well, I know we've covered this in other podcasts there, but if I was moving $1.5 billion of anything, I would want to make sure that it was the most secure, and I'm sure that they thought it was, but it just speaks to the ability of our adversaries, not just China, not just Russia, but North Korea is extremely adroit at intercepts.
Sure. Or, I mean, given the scale of the money involved, I would think, criminal gangs of sufficient
Hmm.
sophistication would see that, and if they hadn't thought of it already, they would say, it's the old line about why do you rob banks? Because that's where
Yep.
the money is. Well, if those subsea cables are where the money flows,
Oh, yeah.
then they're going to become targets for interception and interdiction and diversion, right? I mean, and once somebody shows that it's possible, per your example, then it becomes, it seems to me, almost self-fulfilling that other people will try.
Mhm.
And so, yes, it's a very good point. Financial institutions as well are going to have to think about what security looks like, right? And
Oh,
what they need to do to secure the money, because I assume it's not only crypto, but potentially other forms of financial transfers that could be subject to diversion of various sorts. We've talked on this podcast on other episodes about the social engineering behind cyber attacks, and you know reducing the attack surface and creating a zero trust environment is one way to help hinder those social engineering attacks, because you reduce the opportunity for those vulnerabilities to get introduced. Now,
sure.
no network, of course, is perfectly secure, but we can do what we can, right?
Exactly.
So,
But the banking and the finance industry spend as much money, if not more, on their security than the National Security Agency, because for a lot of reasons. But most importantly, that if they are compromised, then they lose trust. And once you've lost trust, that you spent a great deal of time, just earning that trust, from your clients and your customers, it's very, very difficult to get that back. So security, we're living in a dangerous world in a lot of different ways, but certainly as far as intercept of communications in our computer systems.
right. And as you said, if you can intercept the communications of both candidates for president in an election year, you know, what's safe, right? I mean, it just seems like um, we need to think very, very hard about, you know, whether we're really confronting the vulnerability of this, or whether, it feels like in history, I'm sure the old adage that, generals are always fighting the last war, right? Part of that is because it's very hard for us, I think, as a species to accept how vulnerable something is or the real danger that a vulnerability poses until it's proven, right? But often when it's proven, it's kind of too late. So our challenge as a country, it seems to me, is to try to anticipate the ways in which we're vulnerable before they become,
Mhm.
we hope, of course, not to be in another kinetic war anytime soon, but hope is not a plan. And, we need to be ready to deal with the vulnerabilities that the modern world presents. And again, I think
Yeah.
communications is one of them. And as you say, it's not just a war vulnerability, but certainly that is one of the most perilous, I guess. I don't know. To me, money is one thing, but when we talk about putting lives at risk because our communications are not secure, that's a whole nother level of
Yeah.
problematic.
I have a different viewpoint than most folks. I haven't spent 36 years as a SEAL, but also been the director of the National Counterterrorism Center and the acting director of National Intelligence, that I'm aware of this. So what I try to do is make people aware without making them paranoid. But you have to be aware of your vulnerability. I mean, you've just got, your cell phone. They're ubiquitous. We just live with these, and an adversary could enter into your cell phone even when you think that you have it off. You could have your microphone on that you are broadcasting constantly, and in addition to that, your camera that you think has off. So these are very, very simple things, but a sophisticated, even we talked about transnational criminals. They can do that as well. So these are things that we have to deal with. You can't do without your cell phone, your iPhone, but just understand that you don't know where the information is coming from that you have in there, or even if you're talking to a loved one, it goes to a station, and like years ago, you called somebody and it was their home phone. Now, quite often the most common question they ask somebody, where are you? Because with your cell phone, you could be anywhere. But with that, Big Brother is watching you. Cell phones, towers track you everywhere. And years ago, in old detective movies, they were able to put a transponder underneath the vehicle and track it. That's not necessary anymore. If you've got a
Right.
cell phone, you can be tracked everywhere you go. And to the point where I'm trying to make, even when you think it's off, there are ways to make sure that it is on. So communications, especially for the United States military and the United States Navy, are critically important. So one secure, but with the Outernet and with the Rivada, it is the speed of relevancy for that you're cutting out the middleman to the ground station. And even if it's going through a fiber optic cable, it once it gets up into space, it is moving in a near vacuum on a laser. But when it comes down, the United States Navy is dispersed. They are everywhere. But if you have the connection, then everybody gets the downlink at the same time,
Same
um,
time.
and you need to coordinate in difficult times in tension, and then everybody gets the same information at the same time. So the boss gets it, and then the lance corporal gets it at the same time as well, and that's critically important.
Right. No, that's a very good point. That getting those communications, yeah, across a fleet that might have
Hmm.
dozens of ships, right? That may be
Hmm.
scattered across the ocean and outside of line of sight of each other, and being able to ensure that the same communication reaches everybody simultaneously and can coordinate action and can't be interdicted by a cable cut or something like that, right? We just saw recently that, and I don't know I'd be curious what your thoughts are on the motivations behind doing this, but we saw this announcement from the Chinese that they had developed even better cable cutting technology. And I sort of thought that they wanted to maintain plausible deniability about the cable cutting, right? Declan, Rivada CEO, has been,
Hmm.
trumpeting about the dangers of cable cuts and, to everyone who would listen, but it sort of seemed like, we've had these cable cuts and nobody ever claims responsibility. And then suddenly the Chinese pop up and say, now we can cut them down to whatever, 4,000, I don't know if it was feet or meters, right? But twice as deep as they used to be able to cut them. And why would they do that? I mean, what is the purpose behind broadcasting their ability to do that, do you think?
Well, I think it's a psychological warfare. But in addition to that, they've been cutting cables for a while. The Russians do it as well. So everybody right now has to communicate. So much information is passed through undersea cables. So some of them actually are inadvertent. Some they drag an anchor, but the vast majority of these, there's no doubt in my mind, are intentional. And it's just they know which cable they are cutting. They know what communications are passing through that. So they will cut the cable and then they'll just watch. How long did it take them to notice? How long did it take them to repair it? Okay, now we know we've got that much time. So they're doing these things and seeing what our reaction is and what our reaction time is, so that if they did disrupt our communications, then they know how much time they've got to take advantage of that.
Right. And who repaired it and how many ships capable of repairing it in those, right? As you said, response times and response capacity. What does it take to overload that system to start to lengthen the response times? Sure, I think there's no question that there's a lot of testing and surveilling that goes into these cable cuts.
But Brian, I mean, the Russians and the Chinese use undersea cables as well. So it's everybody's vulnerable. It's like, the Russians, there was a briefing to Congress probably about a year ago where the intelligence community mentioned in some classified hearing that the Russians were putting satellites up in space that were capable of nuclear weapons. All right. Everybody uses space. So that's fratricide, but to put a weapon up there, a nuclear weapon, would just disrupt everybody. But undersea cables, you've got to do it one at a time. Right. And it is time consuming, but the intelligence community, we spend a great deal of time knowing what's there, where's running, and what information is through that, our NATO allies, our partners. But industry, the business of America is business. And, they are conspicuous consumers of information that passes through, oceanic cables. So everybody is really somewhat vulnerable to this. And if it's disrupted, it is not just disrupted, for the government, but state, local, individuals, or the satellites. If you go to the gas station and you put your credit card in there, that information goes up to a satellite before it comes down and says approved. So if they disrupt satellites up there, then everything we do, we communicate by satellite. So you won't be able to get gas. You won't be able to use the ATM. So there's tremendous vulnerability that the Outernet is attempting to, and I think we will be extremely successful to reduce to the extent possible. Because anything I've learned over the years in intelligence, anything can be countered eventually.
That is definitely true. And Declan at our event in Munich during the Munich Security Conference was asked this question, and he said, yes, could you disrupt our satellites as well? And he probably doesn't want me repeating this, but I think we have to be honest and say, yes, of course,
sure,
they are not immune to disruption, but they do have the advantage of being at a higher altitude than some of the other LEO constellations. And also there's strength in diversity, right? Having another layer up there means that if one layer goes down, hopefully, a different layer may survive. And as you said, if the cables go down, you've got the satellites, and not putting all your eggs in one basket. I feel like I'm full of cliches today, but
absolutely right. I mean, in special operations, it was, one is none, two is one. You always have a backup. Always, always, always have a backup. And I think that the strength of the Outernet is that if we do lose a satellite, with eventually we will have 600 satellites up there, okay, then the system itself will realize that well, even it's a machine, so machines break. So if that satellite goes down, then throughout the constellation, they realize, okay, we just got to do a workaround from that satellite. So we have tremendous redundancy that other networks don't have and will not have.
Right. There's a self-healing component to the way it works, and there are multiple paths, and there's a built-in resilience within the network. So we can lose, I forget what the engineers say. I probably shouldn't say the exact number anyway, right? But a substantial number of the satellites and the network will still continue to function. Listen, Joe, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been fascinating, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. And if there's anything else, you want to raise or ask me or just say, that's fine. Otherwise, I think we can leave it there. And I really appreciate your time.
Well, I just do one last thing. That when Declan explained to me what we're trying to do using the RF band, the RFK band, and it just seems so simple. That why haven't we done this before? What I've learned over the years, and Clausewitz said this, war is simple, but the simple things are hard. And I'm just glad we have the engineers and the people with that vision, to be able to do what Rivada Network is doing, because once again, I'm extremely aware of our vulnerability. And the reason why I'm participating, on this board is because I believe very, very strongly that this will enhance our nation's security. And that, I think that, I'm proud to be a part of that.
Well, we're very grateful that you're helping with the mission, and again, thank you for coming on the show, and hope we'll see you again soon.
Looking
Thanks,
forward to
Joe.
it, Brian. Thank you so much.